Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by Dr. James Pennebaker. He is the Regents Centennial Professor of Liberal Arts and Professor of Psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. He and his students explore natural language use, group dynamics, and personality in both laboratory and real-world settings. So, Dr. Pennebaker, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to everyone.
It's nice to be here.
Okay, so talking about language, would you say are the functions, the main functions that language serves?
So it's important to appreciate I'm not a linguist.
Okay.
I'm interested in language because one of its primary functions is communication. That language evolved for us to first warn one another of threats and danger, and then became more. It became more valuable in that it allowed people to think and plan, have access to the future and the past, and it's it's a pretty darn important skill.
Can we say that language influences how our cognition works?
So there's a long debate about that. Obviously, yes. But then in some ways language is reflecting cognition. But what language does is it forces a certain kind of structure on our thoughts. And it forces the way that we think, in that language is setting up our thoughts in a way to share with others. So when I have thoughts by myself, they're not being prepared for another person. Whereas once I put them into words, I'm essentially organizing them in a social way so that you will understand what I am thinking, what my thoughts are, that language is the medium essentially.
Is there anything fundamentally different between the way we process oral language versus written language? Because, I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, written language is much more recent than oral language. So are there any major differences there?
Well, there are huge differences. One of them is the way our brain has been constructed. It's been based on spoken language, so that there are all of these other dimensions in terms of volume, in terms of pitch, in terms of cadence, and all of these other things mixed in together with facial expression. So from an evolutionary perspective, spoken language is far more complex. We have far more brain regions that are set up for it. And as you point out, written language is a really new phenomenon, and so it's a much simpler thing to study, frankly, and to understand, because there are just not as many dimensions to it.
So, focusing on written language, does the process of writing, change our psychology in any way?
So much of my early research all focused on that, and I got into it through a series of quirks. My interest in language, I was frankly never that interested in language, but I became interested in how people cope with traumatic experience, and I found that people who kept secrets, who didn't talk about traumatic experiences, had more health problems than people who did talk about it. And there are various reasons why that might be true. In any case, I did some studies where we had people come in the laboratory and write about major secrets that they hadn't told others, and especially emotional traumatic experiences. And we found that was associated with improved physical health. And this got me thinking about, why is it that writing about something, or perhaps talking about it, makes a difference in people's health? One argument could be that, well, you're just getting it out. This is kind of a simple-minded venting thing, that you have these thoughts inside of you and they're trying to get out, and what talking or language does is to get them out, and now everything's fine. That's a goofy way of thinking, but it's a metaphor we all understand. what became interesting was that, first of all, if you had people write, even if they tore off the writing when they were finished, their health improved. In other words, it wasn't necessarily communicating this trauma to somebody else. And when I interviewed people and when I wrote myself, one of the things that was clear was that when you write about an upsetting experience, you're actually changing it in your mind. You're organizing it. You're putting structure to it. And once you're doing that, it's not as big a horrible event as you thought it was when you started. So I think so much of writing, putting things into words, is essentially reconstructing that event in your head.
Right, and so I mean those sort of positive psychological effects that we get from writing about, for example, traumatic experiences, do we get them more from writing, or can we also get them just from talking about them with other people?
I think we can get them both ways. I think talking with others can be as beneficial or more beneficial. However, there's also a downside. If I tell you a deep traumatic experience, I am risking something. You could, after I tell you my horrible secret, you may deny it or blame me, or maybe I will hurt you, or maybe it'll change our relationships. In other words, talking about something is a much riskier proposition than my just sitting there and writing about it myself. So I think that's one of the primary issues. If whatever I say, you acknowledge, you validate what I say, you're not judgmental, your feelings aren't hurt, you don't change your view about me, then talking might actually be better than writing.
Mhm. And these psychological effects we're talking about, do you know if they are long term or just short term?
That's kind of a, uh, I have to bounce around the question because the answer is sometimes they're short term, sometimes they're long term. But one of the issues is when you write about, say, a traumatic experience and you do that and you realize, oh my gosh, I see what the problem was. You know, this happened several years ago and I didn't realize this. And so now you have reconstructed it. In many cases when that happens, that fundamentally changes you in some way, or it changes your relationship with one person or others. And in that sense, it has a long-term effect. In terms of your short-term physical health, I know that it changes your health for the next few months. But it's a little bit like asking, well, if I give you penicillin for an illness, or some kind of drug for an illness, an antibiotic, does that change you forever or for a short amount of time? Was the same issue. It it biologically changes you for several, might change you for a few months or whatever, but it's not going to kill. That means that bacteria is not going to kill you now. And if it kills you, it is going to change your trajectory. Uh, and I view writing much like that, in that if I write about something that's really bothering me right now, it'll help me get over this thing that's bothering me. However, other stuff's going to come down the pike. Down the road, I will have other miserable experiences that today's writing probably won't make any difference about. So, all of this, what the writing does is it changes the path that you're on right now, and I can't make any long-term judgments. Your physical health will probably you'll have ups and downs in your physical health the rest of your life, so just get used to it, but this will help with this one.
But this sort of writing that people do about their own experiences and the benefits they get from it, does it have to be writing in specific ways? I mean, for example, does it have to be structured? Does it have to follow a script, or can it be whatever type of writing people want?
So the answer is we don't know.
Okay.
I can tell you when I did the very first study, I had people write for 4 days, 15 minutes a day, and I had specific instructions, and the study worked. People went to the doctor about half the rates as people in a control group who wrote about other topics. Since then, there have been well over 1,000 studies done on this expressive writing, and it's now 35 years later, and what I now know is you don't have to write 4 times. You don't have to write 15 minutes at a time. You don't have to write about traumatic experience. You don't have to write about even negative experiences. You can write about positive experiences sometimes. You can write with your right hand. You can write with your left hand. You can write in the air with your fingers. You can type. You can talk and tape to a tape recorder. And all of these studies show similar effects. I don't know of any studies that show better effects consistently, but there's not one true way. And what I recommend to people is, look, if you're upset about something, you find that you're thinking about it too much, you're worrying about it, just write. Go set aside 3 days and, promise yourself you'll write for 10, 15 minutes each day about it. And if at the end of that time you don't feel any better, then writing's not working for you. Go jog, do something else, or go see a therapist or talk to somebody. If after 3 days you feel a lot better and you don't feel like you need to write anymore, then great, don't write anymore. If after 1 day you feel like, oh, I get it, and you don't feel like writing anymore, then that's fine too. There is no one way. And I'm a scientist, and my view about everything is, first of all, never believe anything, but be open to everything. Try writing, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, try something else. And you can try writing in different ways, but some people like structure. I don't like structure. Some people think that you should write and then go back and edit what you've written. I don't like to do that, but I know some people who do. So I do know, I can say with some certainty, that putting upsetting experiences into words is beneficial. You can go from there. And that's my recommendation to people, is experiment. Be your own scientist. Figure it out for yourself. What works best?
But do we know anything about what could explain, for example, why it works for certain people and not others? Are there, for example, any individual differences that could explain that?
I do not know of any individual difference that has reliably been shown to separate who benefits versus who don't. There have been lots of studies where one person finds, people with alexithymia don't benefit as much as other people. But then there are other studies that show people with alexithymia benefit even more than people who are not alexithymia, or neuroticism or openness. We don't find any reliable effects. There are a few things that I do think probably make a difference. People who have just experienced a horrible traumatic experience, all of a sudden they saw someone they loved get murdered right in front of their eyes. Forcing people to write about that immediately afterwards is probably bad. In other words, if a person feels that writing would be beneficial, then I would encourage them to write. But if it's something that's happened really recently, that you're living with it all the time, writing might be too overwhelming for somebody. So I don't recommend doing it immediately afterwards. Wait until you're at that point where, my question to people is, do you find that you're thinking about something too much, that you're thinking about it and to the point that other people are tired of hearing about it from you? If something horrible has happened in the last 24 hours and you're thinking about it all the time, that's not thinking about it too much. That's what people naturally do. But if you're thinking about this all the time in 6 months, and everybody around you is avoiding you because you want to talk about it, that's when I think writing might be beneficial. We know, and we also know that some traumas seem to uh, be more responsive to writing than others. So people at the depths of a depression, there's some evidence that writing might not be beneficial. Um, we know that it is really good for chronic pain. We know that it works for PTSD sometimes, not all the time. We know that for people who are grieving, if there's somebody that you know who died of a natural death, uh, there's not good evidence that writing benefits them. It doesn't hurt them, but it doesn't benefit them. If someone has died from a traumatic death, they were killed in a car accident or something like that, writing does seem to be, there's some evidence that traumatic deaths writing works better than kind of natural deaths.
Does writing have any specific clinical applications? So, for example, are there mental health professionals who use writing in their practice?
I would bet, I don't know of any research on this. I would bet that half of therapists in the United States use writing in one form or another. Part of it is used sometimes for homework. Sometimes it's done in a therapy session itself. Sometimes it is part of a certain methods. Some forms of cognitive behavior therapy will use it as well. So I think it's often used as an adjunct to many therapies.
By reading something that someone has written, can we learn anything about the sort of emotions they are feeling or they are expressing in their writing? I mean, for example, in a clinical context, if a mental health professional reads the writings of a patient, can he learn something about the emotions they're going through? Or, for example, you as a researcher, can you use that to learn about people's emotions?
Of course, and this is a really interesting issue because it's a little bit why we go to plays or movies or we read novels, because in a sense we are, by reading people's stories, even fictional stories, we are learning about how other people think and feel and respond. So and it does tell us a lot about people. One of the interesting issues that has been part of a little bit of the literature on expressive writing is when people write something, should it be read by others? And one of the very first expressive writing studies was one done in two therapy groups. And in one group, the people wrote about traumatic experiences, and then they shared them with the group. In the other group, they didn't do this expressive writing. And what they found in the group that shared these traumatic experiences, they were worse afterwards, which really bugged me at the time. And then I learned that in their writing, they didn't know that they would be sharing it. And one of the interesting problems is a lot of people keep these traumatic experiences secret for a reason, and that is they are embarrassed by it, they're humiliated, they are ashamed, and sometimes when people write these things and then it's made public, they are further humiliated and shamed. And in that case, you can imagine where writing is really terrible. A famous kind of example is I've come across many cases where people were sexually assaulted or raped or by a family member, and often it'll be a daughter, and the daughter then tells the mother, and then the mother, who finds out it's the stepfather who did it, it's impossible in the mother's mind, and so the mother blames the child for inventing this. And so, or blames the child for provoking it. And those kind of cases, that child is far more traumatized than had they just kept the thing secret.
Right. So I would like to ask you a specific question about a part of your work. Can language use predict relationship breakdown? I mean, are things that are words people use, things people say that can help us predict the way that a certain relationship will follow?
To some degree. Over the last 20 years, I've been focusing a tremendous amount on how words reflect psychological state. And I came about this through the work on expressive writing. And I became interested in, can I look at people's writing and get a better sense of who they are and how they're thinking? And when I started this work, I was trying to figure out, well, how do you analyze what people are writing? And I had people read essays, but that reading these essays and coming up with categories was really slow, and judges didn't agree. So it occurred to me, some kind of based method would be a good way to do it. And at the time, I couldn't find any computer programs, and so I started working with one of my graduate students who had some computer science background, and I had played around some with computer programming. And we put together a computer program that's called Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, LIWC, which we pronounce in English Luke. And the Luke program, which actually has been translated into about 20 different languages, including Portuguese, it allows you to go in and analyze any given text, and it calculates the percentage of words in a text that are, say, emotion words or cognitive words or other types of words. And after developing this program, I started to realize that you can learn a lot about people by the way they use words. And it wasn't the words that I would have thought. When I think of words that tells me about people, do they use sexual words? Do they use death words? But those kind of words people don't use very often. What turned out to be far more interesting were these little junk words, the words that none of us pay any attention to, like pronouns, I, me, my, or you, he, she, or articles, a, an, and the, or auxiliary verbs, words like am, is, have, had. And what I just started to discover was that by looking at these tiny words, which are really common, we can start to get a sense of how a person is thinking about themselves, or how they're thinking about their relationship with others, or how they're thinking about time, or how they're organizing their thoughts. And these are really relevant to relationships. So if I'm looking at a relationship between two people, and if I interview you about you and your significant other or other people, I can do a reasonable job in telling about the relationship in the way that you refer to you and your significant other. If you refer to your significant others as he or she does this, that's really different than if you talk about, well, we do this. The difference between he and she and we in talking about a relationship is profound. And it's not shocking when I tell you this. It makes good sense. But there are other things that go on in a relationship as well. A relationship that is really strong and stable, basically, a person who's in a strong, stable relationship, when they are talking to other people, they are able to pay attention to other people. They're not thinking about their spouse or their lover much. In other words, partly because in a good relationship, your mind is clear. You're not worrying about it. You're not thinking about it. You're able to focus on this person or this task or whatever. However, if I'm in a relationship that is falling apart or beginning to fall apart, I start thinking about the relationship more. I might even talk about it a little bit more. And when I talk to this person, I'm not paying as close attention. If I'm at work, I'm not as attentive to some of the details there. So one of the things that I've been moving to over the last several years is looking at big data. And one of my favorite, so a lot of research projects are being done on Twitter. And another one that's really huge in the United States right now is Reddit. I don't know how popular it is in Portugal.
Yeah, we know about it. Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know Reddit, Reddit is it's like a giant bulletin board, and a bulletin board where you have these you can think of them as rooms. There's a room that you can talk about polo, another one that you can talk about football and your favorite football team. You can talk about gardening or cooking or a particular TV show or music, everything. And there's about 200,000 of these chat rooms, we can call them. They're referred to as subreddits. And there's one for people who are going through breakups. So if you're in a romantic relationship and you've broken up, people will go there, and there's about 20,000 people who's a member of this group. But there are hundreds of thousands who post stories about their breakups. Now, what's interesting is a person who goes and says something about their breakup and maybe seeking advice or giving advice to others. These people are active on Reddit and other places. They also are talking about their job, and they're talking about their football team, and they're talking about the games they play, and so forth. Well, what Reddit allows is it allows us researchers to go in and to download everything a person has ever posted on Reddit. And what we did, and this project was done with one of my students, Sarah Siraj, and Kate Blackburn. And what we did was we would find people who posted first on breakup and told their breakup story. And then we would get all their other Reddits. And the average person posted on the breakup subreddit only 3 times, but they posted 142 times in other Reddits, often dozens of other Reddits. And what we were able to do is we got all of their posts in other Reddits from the year before the breakup to a year after the breakup. So I could see how each person is talking in all their other Reddits as it gets closer and closer to the breakup, to the day or the week of the breakup, and then for the year afterwards. And I can't, as a social psychologist, I can't tell you how remarkable this is, because think about this. I know that they're having a breakup, and they're posting in all these other places, on football, etc., and they don't tell most of the other people that they're going through a breakup. And in fact, they might not even know they're going through a breakup themselves until the other person dumps them. But now what we can look at is, as they're talking in these other breakups, are there signals that their relationship is in trouble? And what we find is the answer is yes, that starting about 3 months before the breakup, they start changing the way they talk. They become less formal, less organized, less thoughtful. Their attention span gets shorter. There's a little bit more anxiety in the way they're talking. They are talking a little bit more about themselves. They're using I words more, I, me, and my, because they're becoming more self-focused. And so we're seeing all of these changes, and they're also starting to just ask questions in general. And all of this, in terms of looking at, say, organized thought, they start dropping and dropping and dropping until the breakup. And then we see that after the breakup, they slowly start getting better. And they're not back to where they were at pre-breakup levels till 6 months later. In other words, breakups have a huge impact on them. And what's so interesting about this is, by analyzing this, we can get a sense of people's impending breakup probably better than they themselves know about. In other words, they're giving these signals, and you know, I think everybody has had some kind of breakup, whether it's a breakup of a romantic relationship or a close friendship. And sometimes we'll say, this came out of nowhere. And sometimes it does. But probably more times than others, you're picking up some signal, but you don't know what's going on. And we're all good at fooling ourselves. Oh, there's nothing. I'm sure everything's fine. But you're changing the way that you're thinking, and sometimes your friends notice it, but you're not noticing it. And then the breakup occurs, and people say, "I didn't know this. If this came out of the blue, I knew nothing." But their friends will say, "Well, I could tell there was something odd by the way that you were talking or whatever." And that's what we're seeing with Reddit. So it's what I love about Reddit and this big data approach is we are starting to see psychological markers of individuals and also groups of individuals. And these changes are subtle, but when you have a huge number of people, we can start to see signals that we wouldn't normally see.
Right. So I'm not sure if you studied through the same approach other phenomena and events in people's lives, but do you think that we could apply it to study other things, like, for example, the opposite of relationship breakdowns, that is relationship initiation?
Of course. Uh, and that's the beauty of this is we can anything, wherever people use words, wherever we can get a signal that something has happened, we can look and see how it's changed. Um, I, I don't, I'm trying to think if we have not looked at anything in terms of the beginning of a relationship. And one of the issues is a breakup is, I say this in a cruel kind of way, it's really clear. So that the two people are saying, we're breaking up. The beginning of a relationship is much more ambiguous. So there's sometimes it starts like that, but other times it kind of slowly builds.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be a natural thing to study, and you could definitely do it. We've done a lot of work on COVID in terms of how that has affected individuals and cultures. We've got a paper coming out on that, hopefully in the next few months. Or natural disasters, or there's having a baby. There have been some cool studies with Twitter on people having a baby. The death of somebody close. Almost anything, we can look at this. One of the projects that one of my colleagues is doing is looking at when people essentially come out and they say that they've been diagnosed with depression, or they've been diagnosed with cancer, or they've been diagnosed with something. And some of these people have been living, say, with depression for a long time, but they've never told anybody. What happens when they come out, if you like?
Right. So I would like to ask you now specifically about personality. Can we use language to capture personality traits? Like, for example, I know that to discover the big five personality traits, people use the lexical hypothesis, but to what extent do you think we can really capture personality traits through language?
So, first of all, you have to stand back and ask, what is personality? And personality is this enduring sets of traits or behaviors that people exhibit consistently over time in different contexts. So that's kind of the official party line. The way that it has been, that the Big Five has essentially taken over the field is it's with self-reports. But self-reports are people's self-theories. They are the theories of who we think we are. So if I give you the openness scale on the Big Five, the questions will be, I'd like to try different things. I'd like to try different types of food. I like to, I have multiple genres of music. I like to do the same thing every day. I like to be really predictable. So all of those get at either being really open to new experience or really opposed to new experience. They are your self-theories. They're not really true measures of, you say you like all these new foods, but tell me in the last week, how many different types of food have you had? Your theories are important to your self-worth, and they are predictable. And if I go in, if for some reason your habits change and you stop going out and getting new foods and you start realizing you like the same music, you'll still have that theory that you're somebody who is open and interesting. And that's important. The fact that self-theories are consistent, that's great. I'm interested actually in real behaviors, and I'm interested in language as well. Are people consistent in the way they use language? Well, it turns out they are. But here's what's interesting. The ways people are consistent in their language use isn't related much to the Big Five. And in fact, one of the most consistent dimensions of language that we have come across, in other words, this is much the way that the Big Five was developed. The Big Five was developed through the people giving individuals lots of different questionnaires. And this was particularly true in Minnesota, where they were doing the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Inventory. And once you get this big data for thousands of people, you can do a factor analysis of all the items. And what you find is, by God, it's really consistent with especially American and English-speaking samples. You get these 5 factors, and they are real. They're different if you do the study in Mexico. They're different if you do it in China. But you still get factors, and some of them are the same, some of them are a little bit different. And that tells us that people's self-theories are organized themselves reasonably consistently. So I did the same thing with language, where I was looking at these simple words, and there's these really common words are called function words. They're pronouns and prepositions and articles and so forth. And did a factor analysis of 25,000 college student essays. And when I did it, I got one factor that on the surface it sounded kind of weird. So it was, this single factor is made up of words that include articles, A, N, and V, and prepositions, 2 of 4 words like that. Those 2 categories correlate about 0.3. The more you use articles, the more you use prepositions. And the reason is those 2 types of words are related to nouns. And then there's all these other prepositions, these other function words. Pronouns, I, me, you, he, she, they. Impersonal pronouns, it, thing, words like that. Also, auxiliary verbs, am, is, was, and some others. All of those types, so pronouns, for example, are negatively correlated with articles, negatively correlated with prepositions, but they're positively correlated with auxiliary verbs, etc. What that means really is, if you look at this factor, it tells us that language goes along this dimension, go from this end, that people might use lots of articles and prepositions, and at this end, pronouns and other words. But if you look at those essays, you pull them out, and you find people who are high on the articles preposition side, their is really logical, formal, unemotional, impersonal. So the person might say, I'm interested, or the University of Texas is a university that would be appropriate for my interests. It is a particularly strong school because the psychology department, blah, 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 blah. It's logical, formals, and so forth. And then you get an essay at the other end of that spectrum, high in pronouns, high in auxiliary verbs. Their essay might say, when I was 12 years old, my family moved from Houston to San Antonio. And I'll never forget the day that we moved to this new house, and I realized that I didn't fit in, and I knew I wanted to become a psychologist. That's a lot more interesting story, but it turns out that if you're that the personal story, which is high in the pronouns and auxiliary verbs, that person is not going to do as well at the university as a person whose essay has high rates of articles and prepositions. And we call this dimension analytic thinking. And analytic thinking is a personality measure. The way you use your analytic thinking in one context is related to another. The way that you use it will be the way that if you're high in it now, you'll be high in it 20 years from now. It has all the characteristics of personality. It's associated with intelligence, with social class. It's related to all of these things. It's related to physical health. It's related to success in college, and on and on. It's completely unrelated to the Big Five. Now, the Big Five isn't related to most of these things nearly as well as this. So it starts to raise some interesting questions. If I had told you, if you didn't know anything about this, and I said, well, actually one of the most important personality dimensions is analytic thinking, and that it goes from analytic to narrative thinking, you, like me, would have thought, well, that's a goofball measure. How the hell do you even measure it? Well, I can give you a questionnaire, but you wouldn't be people can't really say, oh yeah, I'm really high in narrative thinking. And, all of us can bounce around some, but it is a personality dimension within language. Now I've gone down a rabbit hole that I know you're thinking, oh my God, my listener is going to say, oh no, he's talking about parts of speech. But what's so exciting about this is that we see personality in language. That dimension is an interesting one because it pops out, and it pops out across culture. It pops out in any kind of, wherever there's language, you have some people who are thinking in this logical, and they're writing in a logical, formal way, or they're telling stories in a much more personal, chaotic way. And that's who humans are. So this is a very long way of saying we can see personality in language, but that personality isn't the personality that we have in self-theories of language. Which one's better? That's a stupid question. They're both capturing different personality types. Just like if we measured personality in terms of biological activity, you've got your stomach reactors, and you've got your cardiovascular people, and so forth. And those are personalities as well.
Right. And talking about stories, are there characteristics that good stories have and bad stories lack?
No.
Okay.
So we've done a tremendous amount of work on trying to identify narratives. And there are fingerprints of narratives. And a typical story, a fiction story, we find it has the beginning of it. It's got, it uses lots of nouns and articles and prepositions, and it drops over time. Essentially, all stories start off where I tell you about the background, who the characters are, where it's taking place, and so forth. And another feature of all fiction stories is once everybody and all the places have been identified, then you can start using shortcuts to make references to he, she, they, it, where, and so forth. And there's more verbs because now there's action. You have to start telling people your story something has to happen. So that's not shocking news. The more interesting one is one thing that we like about stories, and by the way, we find these stories are the same in every language that we've studied. A fiction story starts off where everything is pretty much, we think we know stuff. and then some big problem occurs, there's some kind of conflict, and if we're measuring something that we call, say, cognitive tension, where you don't know what's going on, you're trying to figure it out, that tends to peak at the middle of the story, and then you gradually figure things out, and now you're not as cognitively complex. It gets cognitively simpler as you end the story. So if you look at cognitive complexity, it starts low at the beginning of the story, it peaks in the middle and drops at the end. Now here's the problem. Does a good story, one that you like, does it follow this pattern better than a bad story? Nope. They both have the same characteristic. Now, a chaotic story that nobody likes, we don't know about because those studies don't get published. They don't make movies like that. They don't. So in a funny kind of way, a totally chaotic story is one we don't like. But then we'd say, well, that's not even a story. So a good story and a bad story still has the same general structure to it. So we're not at the point of saying, we'll just run this story you've written through a computer and we'll tell you if people will like it. And it's kind of interesting. I don't know if you've read old Grimm Brothers fairy tales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you go back and read the original, not in German, but old versions of them, they don't make a damn bit of sense. They're not very good stories. However, if you read the modernized versions of them, they're pretty good stories. And what has happened is, what was a good story back then, we've had to change certain features of it to make it palatable to today's audiences. But the structure is probably pretty similar.
But I mean, in that case, those stories would have been considered good stories back then.
That's right. And they would have had a beginning, middle, and an end. They would have had tension in the middle. But we read them now, and we don't even understand it because we don't live in a world where there really are wolves that you really have to be worried about, and in a community where everybody has known each other since they were born.
Right. And do these fictional stories contribute to our mental health?
I don't know of any compelling research that supports it. There have been a couple of studies that did support that, but they haven't been replicated. My intuitive sense is the answer is yes, but I can't give you any strong evidence to support it.
Okay, fair enough. So let me just explore a last topic with you. Are there any sex differences in language use?
Very big ones. And these hold up cross-culturally as well. So in general, and I should tell you, this is one reason I became so excited about language, is the way men and women use language are ways that no one would guess.
Okay.
So I could give you a quick quiz. Who do you think uses the following word types more, men or women? I words, I, me, and my.
Men?
Who uses we words, men or women? We, us.
Women.
Okay. How about emotion words?
Women.
How about cognitive words? Words like because, cause, effect, understand, realize, know.
Men.
How about social words? He, she, friend, pal, etc.
Women, perhaps.
Okay, and articles, a, and the.
I will say men, but I have no idea.
Okay, so you don't know that one. Okay, of all of those, you got one or two right, and the two that you didn't know, you guessed that women might use he, she in social words more. In fact, women use those at a much, much higher rate. Articles, men use at much higher rates. All the other ones you got wrong. Women use I words more. There's no difference. This was a cheat. There's no difference between men and women in use of we. There's no difference in terms of emotion words between men and women. There's some subtle differences, but generally nothing. And cognitive words, women use at much higher rates. So you do as badly as when I was first doing this research. I've given talks at at Harvard, at Cambridge University, at countries, universities around the world, in linguistics departments, psychology departments, and I used to give them all of these tests. Everybody doesn't know the answer. And the effects that I'm talking about, they're big effects. And all of us have listened to men and women our entire lives. You know, in spoken language, the most common word used is the word I. And still, nobody knows that women are using I words at much higher rates than men. And the reason is we think men are more self-confident, more arrogant, self-important, so they use I words more. Well, men are more arrogant, self-important, and so forth, but they don't use I words. I words don't reflect self-importance. They don't reflect self-esteem. They reflect self-focus. If you are looking inward, you use I words more. When you are physically sick, you use I words more. If you are depressed, you use I words more. If people are staring at you, you use these I words more. I words reflect self-focus. And when I tell you that, you say, oh yeah, well that's obvious. But the fact is, men are much less self-focused than are women. We words are weird because there are two types of we words. There are you and I together, we love one another, we're together. But there's this completely other one, which is, I talk to my students, hey guys, we need to analyze that data. That doesn't mean I'm going to go analyze the data. It means, hey guys, you're going to analyze the data. But I use we in this fake way. And we is often a really cold, detached word. And so the men use the cold we, women use the warm we, but it kind of averages out. Emotion words, there's basically no difference. Men use anger words more, women use some of the other words more, but it comes out, and the effects are very small. What's interesting are these cognitive words, or the articles are interesting. The article and cognitive words. So articles, the fact that men use articles and prepositions at higher rates means they're using nouns more. That means men are talking about objects and things more than women. Women use more social words because they talk about other human beings more. They're interested in human beings. Men are interested in objects and things. Humans are much, much, much more complex than our objects and things. If I ask you, listen, I'm having trouble with my lawnmower, and it's making a funny noise. Why do you think that is? Well, if we have this conversation, you'll use some cognitive words, some causal words a little bit. If somebody says, Jose is having a problem with Maria. What do you think's going on there? Well, Jesus, that is so complex. If you have to come up with these theories. If I'm talking, so women are talking about other people, they're having to deal with much more complex topics. They're going to use far more cognitive words than if they are talking about a lawnmower. The point is that cognitive words are reflecting complexity of topic. Rocket science is really easy compared to social science in terms of causal models and understanding. And so here are all these words that we're using all the time. Men and women, so we do, I can go to any given data set and just pull out pronouns, prepositions, articles, conjunctions, auxiliary verbs, etc. I don't have to look at anything they're saying. doing an analysis, and I will tell you if this was written by a man or a woman, and I'll be right 70% of the time. Just looking at those words, they tell us so much about a person in terms of how they're thinking. And what I love about it is it's completely different than anything you or I would have ever thought. And when I first started with this computer program, I was downloading data, and at the end of each night, I'd go in and I'd look at men versus women, and I always found the patterns I just told you. And the first time I did it, I thought, well, that's just a fluke. We all deal in statistics. Women using more eyes, and I first checked, maybe the program is making an error. No, it's not. Well, it's just a fluke. And then I did it again. Wow, look at that, 2 flukes in a row. That's not likely. And then a third time, geez, maybe there's a difference between men and women. Maybe it's just, and I spent a year trying to explain it away to myself. And then at some point, I went back over about 20 different data sets, and I realized, wow, men and women use language totally differently from the way that we all think.
Right.
So the answer is yes.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, do you have any? Of course, you explained some of it, but where do those differences come from?
So they come from the fact that men and women have very different interests. They focus on different things. And you could put this in an evolutionary perspective. You don't have to. It could be a socialization difference. I don't care. Use your favorite theory to do it. But I can tell you, women in writing are more interested in human relationships, and men are less interested in human relationships. And men are more interested in things that distract them away from the self, whether it's sports and gaming, whether it's carpentry or whatever. And all humans sometimes are more interested with other humans, and other times they're less interested. So it's not an either or. And there are some women who are more interested in objects and things, and there's some men who are more interested in relationships. So, but in general, there is this skew about men and women.
Yeah. Okay, so just one final question. Are women really more talkative than men?
No. Uh, that so we did over the years, I've been very interested in natural language, how people talk, and working with one of my former students, Matthias Mell, we devised something that we call the ear, and it's a tape recorder that you wear a lapel mic, and it comes on for 30 seconds, goes off for 12 minutes, and people will wear this for 2 days, sometimes longer. And we've had people in the U.S. and Mexico wear it. And I read an article by someone who claimed that men used far more words every day than women did. Or maybe it was the other way around. They thought that women used more words. And we had data from a number of studies, and I had never seen sex differences. So we went back, and there was no difference. Men and women say the same number of words every day, which is really quite striking. And we ended up publishing this article in Science, which I loved. My colleagues, some of them were furious. I can't believe you published an article in Science that found nothing. and when the article hit the news media, I read all of these comments in newspapers. Well, this study can't possibly be true. This person's not married to my wife. So it was so funny that this is a cultural belief, and it's a cross-cultural belief that women talk more than men. But in fact, and the fact that none of us hear it. That's what I love about this is we all hold these beliefs. All cultures hold these beliefs that, men are sitting there quietly saying nothing and the women are doing all the talking, or that men are using I words all the time and women are not. We've got these, we hold these beliefs where we're looking around and we think the world is this way and it's not. And that's, of course, the joy of science.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, Dr. Pennebaker, just before we go, would you like to mention where people can find your work on the internet?
Just Google my name, James W. Pennebaker, and you'll find me. So
Oh,
it's that simple.
okay, so it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time to come on the show.
You bet. Thanks so much.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. If you like what I'm doing, please do not forget to support the channel. You can go over to Patreon at patreon.com/the Dissenter. And you also have links to PayPal in the description box of the interview. Otherwise, and if you like what I'm doing, please share the interview, leave a like, leave a comment, and hit the subscription button. This show is brought to you by Enlights, Learning and Development Done Differently. Check their website at enlights.com. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and supporters, Karen Litska and Blanchett, Perga Larson, Lau Guerrero, Francis Fordens, Frederick Sunda, Ricardo Vladimiro, Craig Healy, Adam Castle, Olaf Alex, Jonathan Wissel, Jacob Klinkby, Matthew Whittingbird, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollacy, Eric Alenia, John Connors, Paulina Barron, Philip Forrest Connolly, Jerry Mueller, Herbert Gintius, Rutger Voss, Bo Weingard, Rebecca Newberger Goldstein, Dan Demetriou, Robert Windager, Rui Inácio, Arthur Coe, Zoop, Marco Neves, Colin Holbrook, Susan Pinker, Thomas Trumbull, Bernardo Seixas, Pablo Santurbano, Simon Columba, Jorge Spinha, Phil Kavanagh, Corey Clark, Mark Blythe, Roberto Inguanzo, Mikkel Stormir, Eric Neumann, Samuel Andreev, Tiago Nunes, Bernard Ugni, Alexander Dunbauer, Omari Hickson, Fergal Cusson, Yevon Bodrenko, Hal Herzog, Don Ross, Jonathan Librand, Oslam Bullitt, Nathan Nguyen, Stanton T, Samuel Correa, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, J.W., João Eira, Tom Hummel, David Sloan Wilson, Yassila Dez Araújo, Ethan Solon, Romain Roach, Dmitry Grigoriev, Diego Londoño Correa, Tom Roth, Yannick Punter, Adana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavel Ostazewski, Nelek Bach, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, Al Ortiz, Guy Madison, Gary G. Elman, João Linhares, Lida Cosmides, Saima Afzal, Adrian Yegi, Nick Golden, Paulo Tolentino, João Barbosa. My producers, Isar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Tafini, Akian Gilligan, Sérgio Quadriano, Luís Caetano, Tom Vanagdam, Curtis Dixon, João Linhares, Benedict Mueller, Vega Guidi, Sardas France, and Nirban Balachandran, and my executive producers, Michelle Ruzieski, Rosie, James Pratt, and Matthew Lavender. Thank you for all.